You are standing in a kitchen in Lancaster County in the middle of January. Outside, the wind is cutting sideways across the fields at 12 degrees. Inside, you are in shirt sleeves. There is no thermostat on the wall. There is no furnace humming in the basement. There is no propane truck in the driveway. There is just a cast iron stove in the corner. It cost $50 to build. The man feeding it has not paid a heating bill in his life. Neither did his father. Neither did his grandfather. That stove will burn anything that used to be alive. Wood, corn, dried leaves, old newspaper, even the cardboard piling up in your garage right now. 4 generations, not one heating bill. Not one. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how that stove is built, what fuels it can swallow, and the one detail buried in a 1976 United States Department of Agriculture report that explains why almost no American homeowner has ever heard of it. And you do not need to be building a new house to use any of this. You can do it in the home you already own. The first time I walked into one of these homes, just outside Millersburg, Ohio, I spent a good 20 minutes looking for the thermostat before I gave up and asked. The man laughed at me. He pointed at the stove. He said, "That is the thermostat, the fuel tank, and the furnace, all in one piece of iron my grandfather built in 1942. Now, before I tell you how the stove works, I have to tell you about the moment I realized I had been lied to my whole adult life. I was 53 years old. I had just paid a $412 propane bill in February. My wife and I were sitting at the kitchen table looking at it, and I remember thinking, my grandfather grew up in a farmhouse in Pennsylvania that nobody ever paid to heat. So when did heating become a monthly subscription, and who decided that for me? That question led me to the Amish. They never agreed to that subscription. They never signed up. They watched the rest of America hook itself to the meter, and they quietly kept doing what worked. And what worked in most plain communities across Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Missouri was a single piece of equipment that the rest of us forgot existed: a multi-fuel barrel stove. You have probably seen the old 55-gallon steel drum sitting behind a barn somewhere. That is the body. That is the heart of it. The Amish did not invent the barrel stove. What they did was perfect it, refine it, and pass the design down through hand-built kits that any farmer with a drill and a wrench could assemble in an afternoon. The kit itself, the cast iron door and leg set that turns a steel drum into a working stove, has been sold in plain country general stores since the late 1930s for under $50 in today's money. I have one in my workshop right now. I paid $46 and change for the hardware. The drum I got for free behind a feed mill. Here is what makes this stove different from every modern wood burner you have ever seen advertised. A modern wood stove is engineered to burn one specific fuel at one specific moisture content in one specific airflow pattern. If you feed it anything else, the catalytic converter clogs, the secondary burn fails, and the chimney coats up with creosote. The barrel stove has none of that. It has no catalytic converter. It has no secondary burn chamber. It has a primary air intake, a firebox, and a flue. That is it, 3 parts. Which means it does not care what you put inside it as long as that thing once contained carbon and will release heat when oxidized. I watched an Amish man in Holmes County feed his stove in a single afternoon with split oak, dried corn cobs, walnut shells, an old broken broom handle, the cardboard core from a roll of paper towels, and 3 folded grocery sacks. The stove never flinched. The room stayed at 72 degrees. He told me the only fuel he ever buys is the coal he uses for overnight burns in January, and even that he gets in bulk for under $130 a ton, which heats his entire home for about 6 weeks. But here is where the story gets uncomfortable. Because the moment you understand how simple this is, you start asking the obvious question: why has nobody told me about this? Why does every hardware store sell me a $1,500 stove that runs on one fuel, when a $50 stove will run on anything? And the answer to that question is exactly what someone, somewhere, has been counting on you never asking. Let me take you back to 1973. The oil embargo had just hit. Heating fuel prices in the Northeast tripled in 8 months. American families were burning furniture in their fireplaces just to stay warm. And in that moment of national crisis, the United States Department of Agriculture through its Forest Service Research Division, commissioned a study on small farm heating efficiency. The report came out in 1976. It is sitting in the Forest Service archive right now, indexed under Tree Search Document 10,168. I have read it. That report compared 7 different residential heating systems on small farms across the Midwest. Central oil furnace, electric baseboard, propane forced air, cordwood fireplace, modern airtight wood stove, coal pot stove, and what the report called, in its own dry language, a multi-fuel barrel-type conversion stove. The barrel stove won every single category that mattered to a working family. Lowest installation cost, lowest maintenance cost, lowest fuel cost per BTU delivered, highest fuel flexibility, and longest service life, with documented examples in Pennsylvania still running after 52 years of continuous winter use. So if it won every category, why did your father never own one? Why did your local hardware store never carry the kit? Why did the Home Builders Association in your county never recommend it? Because between 1978 and 1988, a wave of new emission standards, insurance underwriting rules, and local fire ordinances quietly made it nearly impossible to install one in a newly constructed home in most American zip codes. The barrel stove was not banned by name, it was banned by specification. The rules required certified secondary combustion, sealed catalytic converters, and EPA emissions tags that a $50 drum and door kit could never carry. A working stove that had heated American farmhouses for over a century was, in effect, regulated out of new construction. But the Amish do not build to those codes. They build on private land, under church oversight, outside the inspection regime that most of us live under. So they kept building barrel stoves. They kept refining them, they kept passing them down, and while the rest of America forgot, the plain communities preserved. Here is what really got under my skin when I learned this. The companies that lobbied hardest for the new emissions specifications in the early 1980s were the same companies that, by 1990, were selling $1,500 EPA-certified wood stoves and $3,000 pellet stoves. The fuel restriction was the business model. A stove that burns anything cannot be cornered. A stove that burns only one specific certified fuel can be cornered. They cornered the market by narrowing the fuel. An Amish family in Indiana, in February, walks out behind the barn and picks up a basket of dried corn cobs that would otherwise rot. Fuel cost, $0. A family in suburban Ohio, in February, watches the propane truck back into the driveway, watches the meter spin, watches $400 disappear from the checking account in 15 minutes. Same temperature outside, same warmth inside, completely different relationship with the system. The Amish saw this clearly because they were never inside the system to begin with. They watched it form around the rest of us. And they made a quiet decision, family by family, community by community, to stay outside of it. That is not nostalgia. That is not religion. That is economic clarity that the rest of us lost somewhere between the 1960 Sears catalog and the first time we signed a 30-year mortgage with a built-in furnace warranty. So now you know what was taken from you. The next question is whether you can take it back, even now, even in the house you already live in. Now, if you already own a house, and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. I get this question every time I talk about traditional heating. The man asking is usually in his 60s. He owns a ranch house built in 1968. The basement has a utility corner. The chimney is a brick masonry chimney with a clay tile liner. He cannot remodel. He cannot pull permits without his insurance company asking questions. He cannot hire an Amish stove builder to come do the work. He wants to know what he can actually do this winter in the house he already owns without selling it and starting over. Here is what you can do, and I am going to give it to you in the exact order an Amish neighbor in Holmes County walked me through it the first time I asked him this same question. First, find your existing chimney. If your house was built before 1980, you almost certainly have a real masonry chimney, even if it has been capped or covered with drywall. Most homes from that era were built with a working flue for an oil furnace or a coal furnace, and that flue is still there, behind the wall. You do not need to build a new chimney. You need to uncover the one you already have. A flashlight, a stud finder, and a tape measure are all you need to confirm it. Tap on the wall in the basement near where the original utility hookups were. You will hear the brick. Second, source your barrel. A clean, never used 55-gallon steel drum can be had for between $0 and $25 from any feed mill, agricultural supply, or food processing plant in your county. Tell them you want one that held food-grade product, never chemicals. They will set one aside. The Amish never pay for these. They get them through trade. Third, get the conversion kit. The cast iron door and leg set is still manufactured. It is sold under several brand names through farm and ranch supply stores, mail order, and direct from small foundries in Pennsylvania and Tennessee. Search for Barrel Stove Kit. The price right now runs from $42 to $68 depending on the foundry. The kit comes with a heavy cast iron door with adjustable air intake, a flue collar, 4 legs, and the bolts. Total assembly time with a drill and a wrench is about 90 minutes. Fourth, locate your stove on a non-combustible base. A 4x4 foot section of cement board topped with brick or stone tile costs about $60 at any building supply. This gives you the floor protection any insurance underwriter would expect, even an old school one. Fifth, connect to your existing chimney with single wall stove pipe and a flue thimble. The total pipe and thimble cost is around $40. The connection itself is straightforward if your chimney is in good condition, and you can have a chimney sweep, inspect, and clean it for under $200 before you fire it up the first time. Total project cost in a house you already own using a chimney you already have, under $300. Total project time, 1 weekend. And here is the part that most people miss. Once that stove is in your basement, hooked to your existing chimney, you do not need to disconnect your existing furnace. You leave it in place. You let it sit there as backup, you burn the barrel stove all winter, and your propane or oil bill drops by 70 to 90%. You are not gambling. You are not betting the farm. You are simply giving yourself a fuel option that the system tried to take away from you. I did this in my own home in 2019. My winter heating bill the year before was $3,140 for propane. The winter after I installed the barrel stove in the basement and ran a heat duct up through the floor register into the main living area, my propane bill was $460. I burned scrap wood that a tree service was paying to dump. I burned dried corn from a neighbor's field that he could not sell. I burned one cold week in January, the entire pile of cardboard packing material my wife had been saving in the garage for 2 years. The house stayed at 71 degrees. And the most surprising thing was not the money I saved, it was how it felt. When the snow was coming down and the wind was howling and the power went out for the 3rd time that winter, I did not panic. I did not check my phone for the utility company outage map. I walked downstairs, opened the door of the stove, threw in another armload of fuel, and went back to bed. That is what self-sufficiency feels like. It does not feel like fear, it feels like quiet. But there is one more piece of this story I have not told you yet, because the barrel stove itself is only part of what the Amish figured out. The other part, the part that makes the whole system work even on a 20 below January night, is something that took me 3 winters to even notice my Amish neighbor was doing. But here is what took me 3 winters to even notice. Walk into any Amish kitchen in mid-December and look on top of the stove. The stove is going, the house is warm. But notice what is sitting on top of the stove, always. In every Amish kitchen I have ever walked into, there is a heavy black kettle, full of water, simmering at the back. There is a cast iron pot, sometimes with stew, sometimes empty on the front. There is almost always a large flat soapstone slab leaning against the side of the stove body. I assumed for years this was just convenience. They were cooking, they were boiling water for laundry or baths. It was just kitchen stuff happening near the heat source. I was wrong. That kettle, that pot, and especially that soapstone are part of the heating system. They are thermal mass batteries. They store the heat from the burn cycle and release it slowly for hours after the fire has burned down. A barrel stove by itself is a fast heater. You feed it, the fire roars, the iron gets hot, the room warms up. But when the fire dies down, the iron cools down within 40 minutes. Without thermal mass, you have to keep feeding it. With thermal mass, the heat keeps coming for hours. The Amish figured this out generations ago. They surround their stove with stored heat: water, soapstone, brick, cast iron cookware. Every one of those objects soaks up heat during the burn and gives it back during the cool down. A single 20-pound soapstone slab, heated to 400 degrees, releases the equivalent of about 800 BTUs over the next 4 hours. Stack 3 of those around the stove, and you have a free, silent, fuelless heater that runs all night long after the fire has gone out. You can buy a soapstone slab from any monument supplier or stone yard for under $30. The Amish often quarry their own from local creek beds. I know a family in Indiana that uses river stones the size of bread loaves stacked in a wire cradle next to their stove. Same principle: free fuel, free thermal storage. But this is still not the secret I promised you at the beginning. The thermal mass trick is good. It is real. It will save you money. But the secret that almost nobody outside of Plain Country knows, the one I want you to write down, is something different. It is something I found buried in that 1976 Forest Service report I told you about earlier. And it is so simple and so cheap that when I tell you, you are going to feel a little bit angry that nobody told you sooner. Before I give you that secret, one quick thing. Everything I have been digging out of these old USDA archives in these Amish basements, the multi-fuel barrel stove you just learned about, the 5-step retrofit on a chimney you already own for under $300, the soapstone thermal mass batteries that run silent all night long, the wasserrohr coil I am about to walk you through, the breath line from the $8 fix video, the buried clay jar from the cooling trench video, the stube wall from the heating video, and all the other pieces I have pulled out of Lancaster County and Holmes County over the years. I have put it all in one place, room by room, season by season, in the order the families actually use it. It is called the Amish Home System. Link is in the description. But stay right here, because what is sitting on page 41 of Tree Search document 10,168 is the one piece of copper tubing that turns a $50 barrel stove into a complete off-grid heating and hot water system. Inside that USDA Forest Service report, document 10,168 on page 41, in a footnote that almost nobody has ever cited, there is a single paragraph describing what the researchers called passive flue heat reclamation in plain community installations. They were observing barrel stove setups in Amish homes in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and they noticed something that none of the certified stove engineers had bothered to study. Above almost every Amish barrel stove, on the single wall stovepipe between the stove body and the ceiling, the families had installed a length of black painted galvanized pipe wrapped spiral fashion with what looked like ordinary copper tubing. The copper tubing was filled with water. It ran from a small reservoir at the bottom, up around the stovepipe in a tight coil, and back down into the same reservoir. That is it. That is the device. The Amish call it in Pennsylvania Dutch a wasserrohr, a water pipe. In English, it is a thermosiphon flue jacket. Here is what it does. The stovepipe itself, in any wood-burning installation, gets extremely hot, 500 to 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of that heat goes straight up the chimney and out into the sky, wasted. The wasserrohr captures that wasted heat by passing water through copper tubing wrapped around the pipe. The water heats up, hot water rises, cold water sinks, so the system circulates by itself, with no pump, no electricity, no moving parts. The hot water flows into the small reservoir above, which the family uses for dishes, baths, hand washing, laundry, rinsing. Free hot water year-round, as long as the stove is burning. The same Forest Service report measured these systems. A barrel stove with a wasserrohr coil delivers, on average, an additional 11,000 BTUs of usable heat per hour into the household in the form of hot water that would otherwise be lost up the chimney. 11,000 BTUs is the equivalent of running a small space heater continuously for free every minute the stove is burning. Total cost to add one to your existing barrel stove this weekend. 20 feet of half-inch soft copper tubing, about $38 at any plumbing supply. A small 5-gallon stainless steel reservoir, about $45 or free if you have an old beer keg. a few brass compression fittings, under $20. Total, under $110. Total install time, an afternoon. You wrap the copper coil tightly around your existing stovepipe in the section between the stove body and the ceiling. You connect the bottom of the coil to the bottom of the reservoir. You connect the top of the coil to the top of the reservoir. You fill the system with water. You light your stove. Within 40 minutes, you have hot water at the tap. Forever. As long as the stove is running. This is the piece nobody talks about. This is the piece that turns a $50 barrel stove into a complete off-grid heating and hot water system. The Amish in Lancaster County have been running this exact setup since at least the 1920s, according to oral histories collected by the Pennsylvania State Heritage Commission. It was documented in writing by the USDA in 1976, and it was quietly, completely, deliberately left out of every American home heating guide, building manual, and energy efficiency pamphlet published in the last 40 years. You can install one in your basement on your existing stove this Saturday. You do not need a permit to wrap copper tubing around a pipe. You do not need an inspector to bless a 5-gallon water reservoir sitting on a shelf. You need a hardware store, a tubing bender, and 90 minutes of patience. When I installed mine in November of 2020, I stopped paying for water heater fuel entirely from October to April. My winter water heating costs dropped from about $90 a month to $0. The water that comes out of that reservoir is cleaner, hotter, and more reliable than the water that came out of my electric water heater for 15 years, and it cost me $104 in materials. What you just learned is something that an entire industry spent 40 years making sure you never found out. A $50 stove, a free barrel, a free chimney you already own, a $100 copper coil, and a quiet, 4-generation tradition kept alive by a community that simply refused to sign up for the meter. You did not lose this knowledge by accident. It was taken from you on purpose, and now you have it back. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect somebody else's profit margin, then you already know what to do with what I just told you. You do not need my permission. You do not need a contractor's blessing. You need a Saturday morning, a feed mill phone number, and the willingness to do something your grandfather would have done without thinking twice. I want to hear from you in the comments below. I want to know one specific thing. What is the first fuel source on your property right now, today, that you have been throwing away or paying somebody to haul off that you now realize you could be burning in a barrel stove this winter? Is it scrap wood from a tree that came down last spring? Is it the corn cobs from your garden? Is it the cardboard piling up in your garage? Tell me, tell the other people watching. Because every comment on this video is one more piece of the network the Amish have always understood, and the rest of us forgot. Real community is information shared freely between people who refuse to be dependent. If you scroll down right now and leave that comment, you are doing something the algorithm rewards, which means the next person searching for a way out of the propane trap will find this video instead of the next ad for a $1,500 pellet stove. That matters. That is how knowledge gets back into circulation after 40 years of being hidden. And if any of this struck a chord with you, subscribe to the channel. This is not about supporting me. This is about joining a quiet movement of people, mostly men in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, who are systematically recovering the practical knowledge that was working just fine before someone decided we should all pay monthly for things our grandparents owned outright. Every week I dig into another piece of it. Water, food storage, tools, building methods. Things the plain communities still do that the rest of us were taught to forget. The next video I am working on right now is about something I saw in a root cellar outside of Sugar Creek, Ohio, that has kept potatoes, carrots, apples, and cabbage perfectly fresh from October to May, without electricity, without refrigeration, and without a single rotten one in the bunch, for 73 years running. There is one specific design feature in that cellar, one detail in the wall construction that the rest of America has never duplicated, and I am going to show you exactly what it is. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss it. Until then, go find your chimney, go call your feed mill, go pick up a $46 kit, and remember what the old man in Millersburg told me: The first time I stood in his kitchen looking for a thermostat that did not exist. He said, "The warmest house is the one that does not owe anybody anything." That is what we are building back. One stove, one weekend, one family at a time.